Hello, everyone, and welcome to Through Time and Clades. My name is Joan Termel,
And I'm Albert.
and today we begin part two of our series on human evolution, Humanity, a Prologue, as it's called. And this is Ahoy, me primates, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. Albert, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I've been very busy this month with various things, revising a paper, reviewing papers, and recording, plus putting together my presentation for the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meeting, um, which is happening in
Mm,
October, online, of course, in these times. So I have to actually record the talk and not just put the presentation together and give it on the spot, which will be
right.
different from what usually happens. So those have been keeping me busy. How about you?
Oh, well, I had my birthday recently.
Oh, wow.
Just turned 26.
Yeah, happy birthday. We did do a few things together on that day, virtually.
Yeah, hung out, watched a movie.
Yep.
Um, it was a nice time, a very nice time. Not to mention working on this exciting presentation for everyone here.
I'm excited to see it.
Oh yeah, so gosh, primates. That is the lineage of mammals to which all of humanity belongs. That's us, and that's the monkeys and the lemurs and so forth. And I feel like this fact is often taken for granted.
Mm,
In trying to answer, that deep question, what does it mean to be human? Often people with varying degrees of scholarship will say something in the vein of, well, humans are apes, so why don't we just look to our primate relatives for these answers?
mm-hmm.
Or like, we'll see monkeys and apes doing things that we have designated as human, and we think, that's funny, how alike we are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, like, is there any real validity in studying the other primates to learn about humanity? It's a good question. So for this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step back from Homo sapiens and shine a spotlight on the other members of the primate clade,
Sounds good.
excluding the apes for now. For
Mm-hmm.
now. Now, there are quite a number of primate species. The last that I counted was 496 of them.
Wow.
So there's no way we're going to be able to do justice to all of them, but I think you'll get a fair sampling of the diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, we've encountered primates in all aspects of our lives. As many societies around the world share a home with monkeys or
Mm-hmm.
lemurs. Where they make up members of the local wildlife. I mean, their influence on world societies has left a lasting and enormous legacy within popular culture,
Yep.
almost certainly. Now, for many of us who live in regions where there are no native non-human primates,
Mm-hmm.
we're likely to be introduced to them at zoos, zoological parks. I mean, I've certainly gotten to know many different species over the years. I think one of my highlights would be my college field trip to the Duke Lemur Center
Oh, right.
in Durham, North Carolina. And there they have various lemurs and other of their relatives. They rear them and they study them and try to help conserve them for future generations.
Yep.
And this is a double treat for me because at the center, that's where they also filmed
Oh,
Zaboomafoo,
right.
which
Yes.
was a for those of you who aren't aware, this is a show that introduced children to animals,
Mm.
basically. The main character, as you might guess, was a primate. It's a kind of lemur called the shifak, and these are the ones that kind of jump on their hind limbs when
Mm-hmm.
they're on the ground. We'll get to see more of them later. Uh, Now, the particular individual on the show, it was a live lemur that they used, that they kind of cut in between with a puppet whenever they needed him to talk and
Yeah.
dance and stuff. Uh, that particular individual was named Julian, and he had died a few years back. So when I went there, I didn't get to see him,
Mm.
but I did get to see some of his descendants, which are still there and breeding. So that was kind of personal for me.
Yeah.
Um, I guess if anyone listening wants more details from that particular trip, I mean, you can always listen to the episode that we had on our old show, Instants and Reflections.
Yeah, I was
We'll be
about to
sure
bring
to.
that up.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description because I gave the whole roster and a lot of firsts for me on that trip, but I'll leave that surprise for those who are interested. Uh, Albert, I was going to say, no doubt you've come across primates in zoos.
Yeah, absolutely. They are a common feature at just about any zoo I've been to.
Oh yeah, same here. Were there any particular encounters that fascinated or delighted you the most?
Ooh, yeah, there have been a fair few interesting ones. So I think among the primates, the ones that interest me the most are probably um, the so-called prosimians, so the Strepsirrhines and the tarsiers, which do not form a clade by themselves, as we shall see. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I've always found those guys especially interesting. So I think I've seen them at several zoos now, but kind of the first time I got to see eyes, I think, was at the Ueno Zoo in Tokyo,
Oh wow.
which was a real treat. Yeah,
Yeah, the eye is an interesting one. I had my first encounter with them at the Duke Lemur Center.
right. I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
They're a lot bigger than you think.
Yeah, yes, yes, that's right. That was one of my first impressions of them as well. Because definitely a lot of the nocturnal primates are pretty small animals. So I had seen things like dwarf lemurs and bush babies, and they're little things that you can hold in your hand. But yeah, the eye is much bigger than that.
Right. It's like a squirrel on steroids.
Right, right.
Well, with all of this said, I think the first thing that we need to address is the question of, well, what is a primate
Mhm.
exactly? So, if we could go to the next slide, please.
You got it.
Now, even though the name primate was coined over 260 years ago, the understanding that humans had something to do with apes and monkeys and lemurs, much less the idea that we're related to them, is not necessarily a recent one.
Hmm.
Now, I remember learning about this from my college professor. For the Malagasy, these are the indigenous people of Madagascar, lemurs held a very special place in their mythology.
Hmm.
In particular, the Indri, which is the largest lemur in the world, is seen as the so-called lost brother of humanity. So, according to the story, a long time ago, there were two brothers who inhabited the tropical forest, and one of the brothers wasn't feeling very engaged in their home, and so they left the forest to become a farmer. They worked the land, and in so doing, he became the first human. While his sibling, who choosing to remain in the forest, became the first Indri.
Hmm.
And so, whenever the Malagasy heard the Indri's loud, distinctive call, they understood that it was the crying voice of their brother, who misses them very much. And incidentally, for one group in eastern Madagascar, the name for the species directly translates to ancestor of men,
Oh, right.
or
Yeah.
even grandfather, which is pretty telling.
Yep. Mhm.
Now, in the late 1300s, you have the Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun, and he wrote a book called the Muqaddimah, and this covered a wide range of topics in history and philosophy and natural history. Now, what's fascinating here is that there are very rudimentary concepts that are very similar to evolution by natural selection. Many centuries later. Uh, Ibn Khaldun goes even further to write, and I quote, "The higher stage of man is reached from the world of monkeys, in which both sagacity and perception are found, but which has not reached the stage of actual reflection and thinking.
Hmm.
At this point, we come to the first stage of man. This is as far as our physical observation extends." So, surprisingly, like there were ideas, even in the medieval world, that humans had something to do with primates.
Right. Wow.
Now, as time continued on and more studies were conducted, this idea became ever clearer. We see the work of an English scientist called Edward Tyson. and he had a 1699 work that was called The Anatomy of a Pygmy. Now, here, that is referring to what we would call a chimpanzee.
Mm.
They're very little known animal at the time, for Europeans at least. Now, he determined through comparative anatomy that humans were more closely related to apes than to monkeys. And so that kind of further cemented our relationship among these animals and also kind of established a concept of phylogeny, if you will. And so then we reach here on this slide the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus, and he coined the term primates in 1758 in his 10th edition of Systema Naturae, that is the general system of nature, at which he referred to them as primates. Now, yes, using the Latin pronunciation, the proper speak is primates.
Right.
We've just come to use primates as the vernacular. It's in this work that we would eventually get a starting date for the official use of the Latin and Greek scientific names for animals. This is courtesy of the International Commission of Zoological Nomenclature, basically the folks responsible for assigning and cementing the scientific names of the animals. Now, what's interesting is that, despite his strong religious beliefs, which was, a general staple at the time, Linnaeus did not let that really interfere with his work in any way. He had this, enormous work of classifying plants and animals, and here he places humanity squarely among the apes and monkeys in his order Primates, which is translated to first rank in Latin. Now, there seems to be a bit of contention as to why he chose that name.
Right.
In all the literature that I've read, it's since it was commonly believed at the time that humans are the pinnacle of creation, if you will, that it makes sense to give us and our kin that prime real estate on the spectrum of life. However, I do know that in the very super helpful lecture notes by Dr. Thomas Holtz for his classes, he mentioned that Primates was coined only because it was the first group listed in the book.
Yeah.
And not really much more to say about that. But I haven't really found any sources confirming that, so I'm a little bit confused. I guess I'd have to ask him personally where he got that. Dr. Holtz, if you're listening, can you give a shout out? Now, one important thing to note is that on a technicality, the term primates has always included humans. Because it was first coined to include humans. That you might hear people say things like humans and primates, for example.
Right.
That's not accurate at all. That would be like saying dogs and mammals, right? It makes no sense. So hence why in this series you'll hear me say humans and the other primates, for example, just to kind of make that clear. Incidentally, Linnaeus got into some very hot water with this classification scheme. Several critics hounded him, naturally. But in a pretty funny manner, he responded, and I quote, "But I seek from you and from the whole world the generic difference between man and simian that follows from the principles of natural history. I absolutely know of none. If only someone might tell me a single one. If I would have called man a simian or vice versa, I would have brought together all the theologians against me. Perhaps I ought to, by virtue of the law of the discipline." But no, Linnaeus was like, we are primates because, in his anatomical searches, there was really nothing that distinguished us. Maybe in a mental capacity, sure, but in what really was important for his classification system, everything checked out. Primates, humans, monkeys, apes, and so forth. Now, if you've been paying attention to the characteristics that I've listed on the right here, these are screen grabs from the English translation of Systema Naturae, you might notice a curious thing. So listed with the usual suspects, we have humans, Homo, simians, and then you have lemurs, and then there's a genus Vespertilio. Now, this is the Latin word Linnaeus used to include the bats. So once upon a time, bats were considered primates under this system. But I'll get back to this in a little bit. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So fast forward to today, we have a very good understanding of what primates are. Of course, genetic studies have helped confirm our kinship among the apes and monkeys, and but there has been a historical understanding of what anatomical traits make primates who they are. That is, a distinct group from all the other mammals. However, when we look at these various physical definitions that have come about over the years, we do reach some problems because anatomists have noticed that living primates share many generalized features with other mammals. That is to say, they have many ancestral characters. Most primates have retained all 5 digits on their hands and feet, for example. We've kept our collarbones. The bones of our limbs have remained separate and unfused, with one notable exception. Our spines have mostly kept the same structure as other mammals, and so on and so forth. Now, our lineage, for all its shapes and sizes, has not really specialized itself in the same way that whales or horses or armadillos have. It's almost certainly because of this that primates have diversified into so many forms. Therefore, it has become more appropriate nowadays to classify organisms by the sum total of derived traits and not ancestral ones. And so I've listed a couple of them here. Now, unlike many other mammalian clades, we tend to rely more on our eyesight than our sense of smell. Primates are highly visual animals, and it is because of this that most of our lineage has reduced the efficiency of their olfactory system. Lemurs and their relatives have retained aspects of this ancestral system. They even still have whiskers like other mammals. But for primates in general, all the nerves and membranes of the olfactory system have become simplified as our eyesight became more important in processing the world. Now, to help with this, primates have developed stereoscopic vision by adapting their eye sockets to face forwards, rather than the ancestral sideways position that you see in other mammals like sheep and horses. That means that we see the world in 3 dimensions, giving us the ability to gauge depth and specificity more accurately. Now, to help take in this 3D information, among other things, primates have developed really large brains. The ratio of brain size to body size is very noticeable, and the actual cerebral hemisphere is sizable as well. You often hear that it is tied to greater intelligence compared to other mammals, but I'll state what this means in a moment. Now, among our mammalian relatives, primates have actually lost one of our incisors and one of our premolars from our row of teeth. The dental formula of different primate lineages varies, and they're generally the same in specific clades. Apes like us, as well as baboons and other monkeys in Africa and Eurasia, have the dental formula 2123. So that is 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars. And the monkeys of America, so squirrel monkeys, for example, they have a dental formula of 2132 for comparison. Primates only have 2 generations of teeth. That's our deciduous or baby teeth, and our adult or permanent dentition. And these don't continuously grow in life. So when they're gone, they're gone. Now, we move down the body. The calcaneus, so that is our heel bone in our foot, has elongated in the primate lineage. Research has indicated that this trait originated when the earliest primates were becoming more specialized for tree dwelling. A long heel made it easier for primates to leap from branch to branch. Now, this feature may also have been tied to our hands and feet, allowing early primates to better grasp with their feet thanks to the efficiency of the tendons. This is probably one of the more widely known primate features, the divergent hallux. Now, this is a technical name for the opposable thumb. Its use in human life is certainly well known. As you can see in the images here, or just looking at your own body while you're listening, our thumbs are extremely helpful for holding objects, while our big toes help keep us balanced and maintain leverage while we're walking. And of course, if you're looking at your fingers and toes, you'll notice that we have nails. Now, ancestrally, primates have converted their claws into nails, and this has become a protective feature that covers our otherwise sensitive fingertips. As the hand became more prominent presence in the lives of primates, grabbing branches or grabbing a smartphone like we do today. Now, of course, there's more to being a primate than forward-facing eyes and opposable thumbs. It's what we do with them that's just as important. And if we go to the next slide, we see that For example, every species plays a key role in its ecosystem,
Yeah.
and there are many groups whose contributions are dramatic in scale, to a point where their removal would lead to radical changes in an ecosystem's entire structure, affecting aspects like biodiversity or nutrient recycling. Now, biologists have recognized these as keystone species, and many have recognized primates as playing key roles in their environments. For example, folivorous primates, so those are the leaf eaters, they often selectively feast on certain parts of bushy plants, like the buds, which encourage those plants to grow faster and more patchy. And this patchiness allows sunlight to enter into the lower parts of the plant that would otherwise be blocked by shade. And this only encourages more growth along all levels of the forest floor. Primates are also seed dispersers, which is pretty self-explanatory, but it's extraordinary in the fact that studies have demonstrated that plants are often better fertilized and grow more readily than if they were simply dropped from their parent plant. Often these plants have adapted themselves to where the seeds need the digestion process to germinate. Otherwise, their tough shells wouldn't allow water to pass through them, and they wouldn't be able to grow. Now, on top of that, primates, they travel quite a distance from the parent plants. And so when they deposit the seeds on the ground, they ensure that the populations remain widespread and diverse as well. So you're not just having like the parent plants reproducing with each other. Now, all primates, and that includes human beings, retain this ability to nurture their environments, foster growth and development, and allow biodiversity to flourish. Now, this might seem bizarre given the current environmental crisis we're going through, but throughout most of human history and across many traditional societies, people have responsibly managed their ecosystem and lived sustainably. This is not solely the honor of the forager societies, but several of the indigenous agricultural communities as well. In places like Australia or Eastern North America, where the land has been managed in such a way that it does not cause ecological collapse. And later on in the series, I'll give more examples of those. Now, the most important behavioral and cultural aspect of primates is our sociality. All primates, even the ones that tend to be solitary, like orangutans, engage in social behaviors with multiple individuals, whether that mates or familial relations or rivals. Researchers have noted parallels between larger brains and social lifestyles. I mean, the kinds of mammals that have the largest brain to body ratios alive today: the elephants, the toothed whales, so things like dolphins and porpoises, hyenas, the pack hunting dogs, and the primates. It may be that large brains are needed to allow the proper processing for living in large communities. Thus, it seems the social behaviors and cultures of primates have influenced the development of larger brains, which simultaneously influence the development of social behaviors and cultures in a feedback loop. For primates, our relationships and our creativity are all enhanced by this social ability. Being able to live in large groups encourages individuals to think creatively, to find solutions to the daily problems that arise in social situations. And this ability to be creative can then be shared and modified with other members of the community, leading to larger social and cultural changes. One can only see the results of this in our human societies. I mean, just look around us, right? But they're prevalent among the other primates as well. Now, here's something that seems so much like common sense that you might not even have bothered to think about it. Often, in primate communities, there tend to be individuals that occupy dominant positions in relationships compared to their kin. Cases abound regarding high-ranking male chimpanzees and baboons, duking it out to see who gets to lead the troop, for example. And this highlights a key aspect of primate behavior and culture: hierarchical structures that are always changing. All it can take is one nasty fight, a chance friendship, even a single glance with the eyes, and the social structure of the group can change. From a very early age, primates are learning all the ins and outs of communal life. And at certain ages, their rank in the hierarchy shifts. They cease being viewed as young and begin lives as adults, for example. And one thing to keep in mind about this is that social hierarchies are not dominated by violence or bullying. A fascinating aspect of primate social life is the findings that show that the group plays an active role in keeping violence in check. Even at the highest levels, the so-called alpha males and females tend not to inflict the sharpest bites or the biggest bruises. Aggression is usually toned down as a threat or a warning.
Mm.
They'd rather give a little nip or a quick chase than outright killing their competitors. And this is because individuals that act too nasty are often shunned or kicked out of the group, and they lose their status by the decision of everyone else. Social groups have a better chance of surviving if aggressive violence is reduced significantly. Otherwise, everybody would be at risk from threats worse than that. You know, and this brings us to our next point. Primates always rely on visual and auditory signaling, but on a much more enhanced scale. Having forward-facing eyes, easily maneuverable facial muscles, and a wide range of limb mobility makes primates very good at communication with one another.
Mm-hmm.
After all, if you're living in a large group, you want to be able to live together and function without conflict. And so the uses of these derived anatomies have expanded as primates developed their sociality. Just think about how we use our faces and bodies to communicate with each other. The raising of eyebrows, yawning, baring the teeth, waving your hand, giving a thumbs up, stomping your foot, uh, mooning somebody. That, and that's just visually. To say nothing of the vast range of verbal cues and signals. You have the alarm calls of lemurs, the lip smacking of chimps, and then so on to include human languages. Now, primate childhood is pretty fascinating, and another feature shared with a few other social mammals, like elephants and whales, is that we are K-selected species.
Mm-hmm.
We take a longer period of time to bear only a handful of young, sometimes only one, and then we spend a prolonged period of time, known as childhood, nurturing and educating them in preparation for the future. And more often than not, the young will remain within the family and or community for the rest of its life. Now, granted, the lengths of childhoods are to varying degrees for primates. Compare, say, some species of lemurs, where it may only take 20 months to reach sexual maturity, to the capuchin monkeys, where it takes 4 to 7 years. A gorilla, it might be 10 years or so. And human childhoods, of course, well, they vary depending on culture, or perhaps philosophy. I mean, Walt Disney, after all, is quoted as saying adults are just kids grown up. So childhood, for us at least, is whatever we make of it.
Right.
And it will be important to consider all these anatomical, behavioral, and cultural foundations in the primate world as we move forward in this series, talking about human origins. So for the rest of the show, I would like to explore the primate family tree a little bit. I'm going to trace the evolution of the group from right before their common ancestor arose and so on towards the start of the hominoid or ape lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we'll save this for the next episode. And we're going to take a few stops along the way to just kind of introduce ourselves to our neighboring primate family. So if we could move to the next slide.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody, I'd like you to close your eyes and take a deep breath. Imagine you're living in the world of 66 million years ago. All around you, the Earth's ecosystems are undergoing a dramatic change. There's a mass extinction event occurring, after all, spearheaded by the collision of an enormous bolide into the future Yucatan Peninsula. All the large dinosaurs, the giant flying pterosaurs, a collection of marine reptiles, and other kinds of organisms are dying off en masse. It might seem like the mammals are doing pretty well, but there are losses within this group as well. And so fast forward a few million years later, where one branch of them, the placental mammals, diversifies in an adaptive radiation as the ecosystem recovers. There's niches to fill, after all. Now, one lineage of these is called Euarchontogliers, and it's a grouping that was discovered thanks to genetic studies and remained almost undetected by the traditional morphological approach. This group is split into two major clades. You have one called gliers, which encompasses gnawing mammals, so rodents as well as the lagomorphs, that is, the rabbits and the pikas. And the other is called Archonta. And it's here where things get really interesting.
Hmm.
So, before the revolutionary DNA studies, the group Archonta was uncovered based on supposed morphological similarities. The ankle, for example, was adapted towards flexibility in many of the members of this group, and this wasn't found in the other mammals. So these flexible ankled animals were allied together. In this way, Archonta included the primates, the gliding Southeast Asian colugos, sometimes called flying lemurs, even though they don't fly and they're not true lemurs. Um, Not to mention the tree shrews, which again are not shrews, nor are they particularly arboreal in their habits, and the bats, which encompass some 20% of all the living mammals, and being the only flying mammals too by technicality. Now, this was notably reflective of Linnaeus' description back in the 1700s, of course. He not only grouped bats with primates, he wrote that bats were primates. And it was these morphological studies before the genomics revolution that led to some very fascinating hypotheses. Like there was a suggestion that bats were not a natural group, with the fruit bats and the flying foxes seen as more closely related to the primates than the smaller so-called microbats, due to similarities in anatomical structure. Now, it wasn't until the 1990s and onwards, when the genetics revolution was underway, that this traditional classification began to crumble just a little bit. Now, we recognize that bats are not related to primates at all. Their DNA allies them closely with hoofed mammals and carnivorans like dogs and cats. Now, the curious tree shrews have turned out to be an even bigger puzzle. If you could tell by the dashed line here, they were originally grouped with primates as primates, and then later they were argued to be close relatives. But now you have several studies that suggest that they might actually be archontans at all, maybe even closer to the Glir's lineage. We'll have to see. But I should mention that these changes in classification might seem trivial if you're not phylogenetically minded, but these get us closer to understanding how mammals evolve in the first place. So it helps to make sure that the details are accurate.
Right.
And that's especially the case for primate origins. Now, the fossil data shows that primates were established by 56 million years ago, with the oldest known fossil being a small creature seen at the right here, Tyhardina. Uh, the molecular clock, with all its various calculations, has placed the origins of primates anywhere from 63 million years ago to 85 million years ago, which would put them long before the end Cretaceous extinction. But as the molecular clock has been calibrated a little bit better in recent years, a later post-Mesozoic date is appearing to be the most accurate. So perhaps 63 or 56 million years ago might be the right place to see the first primates. Now, there is a big question concerning a particular group of extinct mammals. You'll notice one on the left-hand picture here. These are the Plesiadapiforms. Now, they show up in the fossil record around the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs, 66 million years ago. And then they eventually die off 55 million years ago. Now, for a long time, it has been argued whether this group, due to a number of anatomical similarities, was ancestral to Primates, or whether they are a stem lineage that left no descendants. I mean, they certainly look like primates. Many of them sport the long tail, the adaptations to tree dwelling. They even have the divergent helix, for example. But they also lack many quintessential primate traits. They don't have forward-facing eyes, or the particular features of the brain case that are so typically primate-like. The most damning evidence that relieves them as primate ancestors is their teeth. Many of them lack premolar or canine teeth at all. And those that have premolars have a much lower number than the oldest primates that have been uncovered in the fossil record. And specialized animals like that probably didn't evolve or couldn't have evolved into primates, which have a greater number of premolars. mammalian bodies don't seem to be as plastic as that. So, with all of that evidence, it seems that the Plesiadapiforms were indeed a sister stem lineage, splitting off right before the direct ancestors of primates evolved. Now, the evolution of primates and rodents, incidentally, is probably responsible in part for the extinction of the Plesiadapiforms. Most members of this extinct group would have occupied niches similar to those that primates and tree-dwelling rodents like squirrels do today. And competition between these three lineages likely resulted in the Plesiadapiforms being the losers. Consider again, the oldest known primates are at least 56 million years old, but the last known Plesiadapiforms are 55 million years old. So, curious, very curious. So, what do we actually know about the lifestyles of early primates? They were almost certainly small and arboreal. The world of the early Paleogene period was a tropical hothouse. You have pole-to-pole forests full of food, and all primates share the elongated heel and the divergent toe. And these would have been really great adaptations for moving in the trees, allowing them to grasp even the smallest of branches with ease and leap further distances when necessary. And forward-facing eyes, again, allow for stereoscopic vision. You can increase the range and clarity of sight. So that way, you know how to judge distances and not fall to your death.
Right.
I can only imagine how many early primates slipped and missed before they got the hang of it. No pun intended, by the way. Now, there was a recent study by Yanghua Wu and colleagues that I found that revealed some very fascinating insights into this early world. By comparing the different genes for eyesight in primates and other Urocontogliars, they hypothesized that the earliest primates were actually diurnal animals.
Huh.
They were active during the daytime. Their eyesight seems to have been less attuned to rapid, quick movement, which goes in line with another hypothesis that early primates were more herbivorous than not. If you're an animal that hunts insects, it helps to be able to deduce and track high bursts of speed. But if you're feeding on things like seeds, fruit, and leaves, well, then more of your eyesight would be dedicated to seeking out those types of food. And there is other evidence that has pointed to a more nocturnal lifestyle for early primates. So this particular controversy of diurnal versus nocturnal is far from resolved. I think the genetic evidence is pretty telling here. Equally less resolved is just where primates evolved in the first place. Now, convention would tell you that primates evolved somewhere in Asia, because not only were the then oldest known primates found, you also have the earliest rodents, lagomorphs, tree shrews, and colugos, all also coming from Asia.
Right.
So, that would make Urocontogliars an Asian development, if you will. Now, that was before new fossils complicated things. Remember little Telhardina, the oldest known primate? New fossils from North America show that the members of this genus represented there are actually older than the Asian specimens. Now, does that necessarily mean that North America was the original homeland of the primates? Well, I'd argue not really. We know from ancient biogeography that the continents in the northern hemisphere were much closer together at the time. And, they were actually, I think, connected at the poles. And not to mention the end-to-end covering of tropical forests for that region. Animals could very easily move between these landmasses at will, primates especially. And such a condition would make it very hard to pinpoint ancestry, especially since the fossil record is not really fantastic for the earliest primates. So for now, an origin in the general northern hemisphere seems likely, but as far as to the pinpointedness, we really don't know yet. We'll have to wait for more fossils to see.
Yep.
So, Primates is split into two lineages. As Albert mentioned, there's Strepsirrhines, and then there's Haplorhines. Now, these are the wet-nosed and the dry-nosed primates, respectively. Now, what that means for the Strepsirrhines, at least, is that they have retained the rhinarium of earlier mammals, which is moist to the touch. Think about the nose on your dog or your cat. You can touch it, and it's very soft, very moist. Now, the snout then is a very sensitive feature. It's aided by whiskers and a large olfactory region in the brain that processes smells. Now, for primates, of course, there is a greater reliance on eyesight, but for their purposes, the Strepsirrhines have kept this good sense of smell. They also have a really neat grooming claw on
Yeah.
their second toes, so that would be parallel to our pointer finger. And among the lemurs specifically, there's also a tooth comb, where the lower incisors and canines have adapted themselves forwards from the face. They point and they make a sort of comb, and these are also used in grooming. Now, throughout the fossil record, there have been many types of Strepsirrhines, and there's one lineage in particular called the Adapiforms that contains many fascinating primates that have otherwise left no living descendants. Um, those of you who have kept up with the news might remember the infamous Darwinius massillae,
Oh,
for
yeah.
example. Of course, we now know that that was an Adapiform, and it really had nothing to do with human evolution. Like all those news stories reported over a decade ago, it's supposed to be the game changer.
You're right.
Um, now, these animals are pretty cool, but for this series, let's stick with the living lineages of Strepsirrhines for now. So we go to the next slide,
Sounds
please.
good.
Now, the living Strepsirrhines are divided into the Lorisiforms and the Lemuriforms. Now, the former, which I have profiled here for your convenience, includes the lorises of India and Southeast Asia, the Central and West African patus and anguatibos, and the Greater African galagos. And these are sometimes known as bush babies because they make these very baby-like whining calls that if you're in the forest, you might have a different impression. Somebody's baby.
Right.
Now, these stand out as the only living Strepsirrhines to have remained on the mainland continents, while all the others have since died out due to environmental changes or competition with other primates like monkeys. Now, while the Loris and Pato lineage, this is Lorisidae, and the Galago lineage, which is Galagidae, they're both small-bodied, nocturnal, and omnivorous. They're otherwise completely different animals.
Yeah.
So lorises and patus, they move through the trees very slowly. They climb the branches with precision, and this can make them particularly vulnerable to predators, things like snakes and birds of prey, and even orangutans, surprisingly, have been known to prey on these animals. Now, thankfully, they have a very unique defense for a primate. They're venomous. Lorises actually will eat poisonous insects, and when they groom themselves, they lick these special glands underneath their arms, and then they spread this poison that comes from that all over the body.
Right.
So when an animal tries to attack them, the loris can bite and bite really hard and really deep, and this then transfers venom into the predator's bloodstream. Now, this has to be a very effective defense because you have reports from humans who seem to think that these things make good pets.
Yep.
That they tell you that the venom is so powerful that it can induce anaphylactic shock.
Right.
That also has the potential to actually kill a person. So that should be more than enough of a lesson to tell you that these animals should remain in the wild.
Yep.
All those cute videos you see of the galagos and the lorises stretching their limbs and getting rubs, that is a distressed animal.
Right.
That is not.
Yeah. It's not trying to be cute. Yeah.
Right. It's not. It's distress. So I imagine a lot of our viewers would probably know this, but you never be too sure. Now, galagos, in contrast, are extraordinarily fast leapers. From tree to tree, boom, boom, they can launch themselves vertically, something like a distance of 2 meters or so.
Yeah.
And for a very small primate, that's no small feat. In fact, there are even reports of leaps stretching 6 meters across.
Wow.
That is, that would be like me jumping across the houses in my neighborhood.
Right.
And they're not very close together either, so that's something. So there are several species of galagos that have very distinct diets. And in some parts of Africa, this has allowed them to actually live together in the same environment,
Hmm.
where otherwise competition would exclude this. Now, interestingly enough, several primate communities and other lineages have undergone the same thing. That just seems to be a thing that primates are best at. Now, while some galagos do lead solitary lives, others are very social. And what is particularly interesting about galagos is that each call is unique, not just between species, but between individuals. So even in pitch blackness, you can get two galagos that recognize each other just by their sound, before they make it a point to sniff each other and confirm who is who.
Hmm.
If we could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Now, the other lineage of Strepsirrhines, again, is lemuriforms, or the lemurs proper. Now, the entire group is confined to the island of Madagascar, which is just off the southeast coast of Africa. Now, in size, Madagascar is slightly larger than the British Isles, and thus supports a very unique and fascinating fauna with a very large distribution. Now, given that primates likely originated in the northern hemisphere, how on earth did they manage to reach Madagascar?
Hmm.
Um, Nearly all of the lemurs, except for one species, but that's a very particular example, they can't swim. They are not very good swimmers. And the distance between Africa and Madagascar is on the order of 419 kilometers at the closest point.
Right.
So, what gives? Now, at the time when the first lemurs reached Madagascar, which has been calculated to have been around 54 million years ago,
Hmm.
the island was not much further or closer away than its present location. It's kind of stayed in parallel with Africa based on the geologic data. So, the Mozambique Channel, which separates the two, would still have been a very notable barrier. Now, this hasn't stopped several species from settling the island. Some animals have swam there. You have the ancestors of the tortoises and the now extinct dwarf hippos,
Hmm.
which used to be a presence there. Much less the animals that can fly, so like the birds and bats in Madagascar, that should be a no-brainer.
Right.
Uh, for animals like lemurs, which cannot swim, there really is only one possibility that can be explored here, and that is that the ancestors of Madagascar's lemurs may have arrived as stowaways on rafts of floating vegetation.
Hmm.
Now, this might sound crazy, and I'm not talking about like a Huck Finn style raft that just they're just comfortably rafting along and the breezes in their hair and everything's great.
Right.
Um, this is a phenomenon that is far from discounted. Anybody, if you watch footage of hurricanes or tsunamis or floods, the destructive potential and how like you get these huge clumps of debris that just end up getting washed out into sea.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember reading about the Japanese tsunami from
Oh
2011.
God. Yeah.
Um, I think at last count, they documented like 20 million tons of debris washed out into the ocean,
Hmm.
which is just dramatic. Um, so, you can imagine a fair sized tsunami striking the Southeast African coast of 54 million years ago, and then sending out thousands of feet of foliage into the ocean from the neighboring forests. And so the odds are pretty high that loads of native animals and plants would have been stuck on these floating masses. And given the nature of the currents at the time, it would have only taken about a month to end up on the shore of Madagascar. And it's also interesting to consider that some of the lemur species can actually undergo torpor. I
Right.
believe it's dwarf lemurs that can do so.
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, they can dramatically slow down their metabolism, kind of like the Lystrosaurus that we talked about in
Yep.
our earlier news show. Um, so maybe the ancestral lemurs had this too, and then the trip would have been even easier. You wouldn't have to worry about excess food and water. Now, once on the islands, or rather the island, the lemurs underwent an adaptive radiation, as there were no other primates on the island to compete with them.
Hmm.
And lemurs became specialized for both diurnal and nocturnal living. Some shifted their diets towards particular plants and animals, becoming carnivores and herbivores. Some became very small, while others grew significantly large.
Right.
So, if you can see from the two images here, these represent just some of the giant lemurs that used to roam Madagascar. The largest species out of this entire group is shown above. This is Archaeoindris, as big as a gorilla at 200 kilograms.
Wow.
That's an impressive animal. And there were also lemurs called Paleopropithecids, which kind of look like giant sloths.
Yeah.
They would have hung on branches, and they had these long claws so they can have a sturdy grip. And there were what are called monkey lemurs, or Archaeolemurines. So that's Hadropithecus down here. And these converged on many of the body plans that the African and Asian monkeys developed. So if you weren't paying attention, you might think that this was a monkey. But nope, it's just a big lemur that looks like a monkey. And so just thinking about the ecology of Madagascar in those early days, it would have been impressive. I mean, you had giant lemurs, you had dwarf hippos, you had giant tortoises, you had the elephant bird, Epiornis, which Albert had talked about in the last episode. Not to mention giant predatory eagles that would have hunted all of these animals, and so on and so forth. So what happened? Where all these animals go? Well, save for some interesting evidence that dates back to the 2nd millennium BC, the oldest definitive evidence of a human presence on Madagascar goes back only between 1350 to 1100 years ago.
Yeah.
And it would have been the Austronesian-speaking farmers, so sailing from insular Southeast Asia. And this would have been part of the population expansion that peopled much of the Pacific Islands. It's the same kind of people. And then on top of that, you have at about the same time, incidentally, you have Bantu-speaking farmers showing up from Eastern Africa, and they're bringing cattle with them. And the samples that have been done on the island have indicated that right from the start, there was immediate changes to the vegetation on the island.
Right.
And as usually expected, when you have agriculturalists landing on new islands, within a period of only 300, 500 years, all of these giant lemurs and big birds and tiny hippos were hunted and wiped out. So that seems to be the best scenario for the loss of all of this biodiversity. And so on the following slides, we have the lemurs that have remained on the island. So we can go to the next slide.
Yep.
Our aforementioned aye.
Yeah,
so
my favorite.
This is, these are fun. The only living members of their group, the Daubentonidae. So these incidentally were named after a French scientist who described them in the late 1700s. So this is Louis Jean-Marie Daubenton, hence Daubentonia madagascariensis. Now, as part of the greater radiation of the giant lemurs that I just talked about, there was a giant aye that evolved. That again would have been hunted to extinction after humans arrived. About 2 times larger than the living species. So, I mean, we've talked about how impressed we were at the size of the aye. Now, picture that twice as big.
Right,
It's like, wow. That would have been like a dog or something in the trees. Now, living aye, unfortunately, is not faring any better. Originally, much of the Malagasy people placed actually great respect and unease as well with the aye. For example, if one was accidentally killed on a hunt or in a trap, the people took great lengths to give it a proper burial, lest the aye's supernatural power was turned on the community.
Right.
But at some point, there was a shift in these beliefs, and the aye became a really despised and evil creature, just the sight of which would almost certainly spell death for anybody who was unfortunate enough to look at one. And so to remedy that, the animal would now be killed immediately. And it also doesn't help that these things have taken a fancy to the local agricultural crops. They like to eat sugar cane and they love coconuts. So, of course, there is a concerned effort now from foreign conservationists and the locals to try to halt the slaughter and save this animal from extinction. Because, given its unique position in the lemur family tree, much less the primate family tree, it would be a really great loss if the aye went extinct.
Indeed.
It has a lot to teach us. Now, despite the haggard appearance, the aye is an all-around pretty chill lemur. I mean, they mostly live alone. They slowly climb through the branches and they hunt for grubs and other goodies during the night. Now, the third finger, which is the equivalent of our middle finger,
Mm.
as you can see highlighted in this image here, is very highly adapted for that purpose. It's long and it's thin and it's tipped with a very sharp claw. And the eye uses this in much the same way that a woodpecker would use its head. It taps the finger rapidly on the bark of a tree, and when it makes out a hollow space, which would then be the hiding area for a grub, it uses its chiseling teeth to rip out the bark and then insert its finger inside the hole and then pull out the food kind of like a skewer.
Mm.
And then it gets a nice, juicy meal. Now, curiously, it is this strange teeth of the eye, this chiselingness, that very much resembles what rodent teeth is like.
Oh yeah.
And it was classified as a rodent when it was first found.
Right.
It was thought to be an aberrant squirrel, if you
Mm.
will. Nope, it's just a really cool primate that hopefully we can have for generations to come.
Yep.
Now, if we go to the next slide, please,
Yep. Mm.
we'll meet the next lineage. This is the Indridae.
Mm.
So they kind of like teddy bear people. These are very powerful animals. You know, their legs are strong and they are superbly adapted for vertical clinging and leaping. Some species have been documented jumping a distance of 10 meters from
Yeah.
tree to tree. And this clade includes a number of very curious species, including, here's our friend, the Indri. This is
Right.
the image left here. Again, the largest surviving lemur. It reaches a length of about 70 centimeters from the head to the base of the tail, which again is just a little nubbin. It's a curiosity among lemurs. Its tail is not very long.
Right.
But then there's also the Shifox. So this was the Zaboomafoo of some of our childhoods.
Yep.
You can see at the lower images here. These lemurs are particularly fascinating in that they can bound across the ground on their hind limbs for short distances. So imagine a person skipping, and that's basically what this animal
Yes.
is doing.
Right.
They're very effective at this, you know, in moving in trees and on the ground. And this is a fun tidbit if you're familiar with the Tetrapod Zoology blog, as we are. When these animals are jumping from tree to tree, they even have this strange sort of fleshy web underneath their armpits, and this acts as a kind of parachute that can slow its descent as it goes from tree to tree.
Yeah.
And I know that there's been some speculation that this might be maybe a precursor to a gliding structure.
Right. Right.
Which would be very interesting. I'm just thinking about Momo from Avatar,
Oh, right.
who was a flying lemur, a true flying lemur, and how like maybe this is the start of that. Maybe it's not the best example because I mean, Momo. I mean, he's a lemur, but he's a mixed with a bat, so that's how he flies. But I mean, yeah, who knows? Maybe a couple million years, we see what the Shifox are up to.
Right.
That'd be kind of fun. Now, also in the family are the woolly lemurs. So this is at the top right here. They're the smallest and the furthest of the group, and incidentally, they are perhaps the most sleepy of the lemurs. 60% of a woolly lemur's day is spent resting.
Wow.
And that's because the leaves that they eat are not really nutritious, and so there's not a lot of energy that they can get. So they kind of make up for it by napping a lot, which is not a bad way to go about things.
Right. Right.
If we go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So here I've profiled two clades. So this is Lepellemuridae, or the sportive lemurs, and Chirogalidae. This is the dwarf and the mouse lemurs. Now, so there's a sportive lemur on the right and a dwarf lemur on the left here. Now, there are some genetic studies that group these two together, so I've just gone ahead with that arrangement here. But there are others that disagree. Now, the smallest lemurs, and by extension the smallest primates, belong to the Chirogalidae. So Microcebus berthei, this is Madame Berth's mouse lemur, takes the title. It only reaches a weight of 30 grams and a
Wow.
body length of 9.2 centimeters. So if your hand is big enough, you can probably hide one by just closing your hand.
Wow.
That's small. It's really impressive. Um, and as you might guess, animals like these spend their days climbing about on the branches and catching insects. Um, but they also scrape gum off of trees and
Mhm.
eat that. And there are a couple species that are actually pollinators as well. In fact, lemurs, this seems to be a thing with many species on the island, which makes them even more of a ecological importance.
Right.
The related sportive lemurs are curiously named because they're not really energetic animals at all. I mean, like the woolly lemurs, much of the food that they eat is very nutrient poor,
Mhm.
and it's so poor that they do the same thing that rabbits do. They have to eat their own feces to get every last ounce of
Right.
energy. Um, so it's because of this that again they rest for long periods of the day, especially during the cooler seasons.
Mhm.
So they actually like wait till the weather and the climate gets nicer, so that way they can spend more of their energy getting more nutritious food. So that's just kind of hilarious to me.
Right.
Yeah, we could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So lastly, there are what I like to call the typical lemurs,
Mhm.
or a lemur a day. I mean, you'll sometimes see these called true lemurs,
Mhm.
but I mean, technically, all the members of lemuriforms are called lemurs, so
Right.
it's personal preference at this point. Now, probably the most familiar member of this group is the ring-tailed lemur, as you can see on the left here. We got that raccoon-like tail that it
Mhm.
raises high in the air as it walks. What's really funny is like my sister's cat Barbara is often called the lemur
Oh yeah.
because when she walks, she sticks her tail up in the air and it's striped. So a joke for us.
Right. Right. Appropriate.
But there are, there's other neat species of lemurs too. There's the ruffed lemurs, which you might remember in my discussion on the species concept
Oh
in
yep.
the first part of the series. Which, next to the injury, are the largest lemurs that are around.
Mhm.
Um, and yet they have very short gestation periods, and they produce up to 3 offspring,
Wow.
which is weird because that's usually something you find in the smaller lemurs, like
Right.
dwarf lemurs. I mean, they even have 3 pairs of nipples,
Huh.
which that is not a thing that primates do. I guess except for those ones.
Right. Right.
But then you have the bamboo lemurs, which is the individual on the right
Ah
here.
yes.
Um, and as the name suggests, yeah, they pretty much only eat bamboo. Um, Now, if you know anything about bamboo, you'll know that it's a fairly poisonous plant.
Mhm.
I mean, it contains cyanide. Now, animals that eat bamboo tend to have adaptations in their digestive system that deal with this. So, panda bears, of course, most famous bamboo eaters, they can convert the cyanide into a less toxic thiocyanate, which is then removed when it pees, and so they can enjoy bamboo without and flush away all the toxins as well. Now, incidentally, for the bamboo lemurs, we haven't been able to really crack that mystery. We
Mhm.
have no idea how they do it. Uh, so keep our fingers crossed on the literature in the near future.
Huh. Yeah. Mhm.
So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Yep. Mhm.
So now we reach that other great branch of the primate family tree. So this is Haplorhini. These are the dry-nosed primates.
Mhm.
Now, here there's a very great anatomical contrast with the Strepsirrhines. As you can see clearly, these two images at the left here. We have a lemur and a gorilla. Uh, while many of the descendants of the first Strepsirrhines lost their trichromatic, that is, their full color vision, the ancestral Haplorhines retained this. That recent study that I talked about, the Yanghua Wu and colleagues one,
Mhm.
well, in their study, they also found evidence that the first haplorhines had become nocturnal animals.
Hmm.
And so, in the twilight, as well as maybe the dimness of the moonlight, it's been speculated that that provided fair conditions for these ancestral animals.
Hmm.
You know, Being able to single out insects and other small species, which appear to have been the main source of food for the earliest haplorhines. Um, Simultaneously, this would have caused a dietary shift in this lineage, which means that all of these primates can now no longer make vitamin C on their own.
Mm.
They have to get it from food that they eat. Now, the eye socket changed too, and this is really neat. Whereas originally there was just this post-orbital bar of bone that would have held the eye in place for, say, Strepsirrhines,
Mm-hmm.
now you have a post-orbital plate that would have protected the back of the eye and provided even greater protection. So I don't recommend this, but if you want to see this for yourself, you can go to your pet and kind of like smush behind their eyes, and you can feel the eyeball. Whereas if you try to do that, your temples are blocking it.
Right.
So there's a sharp distinction that makes the Haplorhines so unique. Now, this greater reliance on eyesight would have also played a great role in the gradual reduction of olfactory ability that I talked about earlier. The tarsiers, which are the only surviving non-anthropoids of this group,
Mm-hmm.
they retain their whiskers,
Mm.
and yet they lack the rhinarium that is found in the Strepsirrhines and
Right.
is also absent from the monkeys and the apes. When the ancestral Haplorhines lost their rhinarium, they gained an upper lip in the
Mm.
process. You can see very clearly on this gorilla.
Right.
Since that the earlier feature of the rhinarium, the nostrils and the gum line were all connected together, but now it's all free, and it becomes a lot easier to make all sorts of new facial expressions,
Mm-hmm.
which would have then increased the ability of communication between members of the social groups. And so it's from this point on that the Haplorhines are divided into two lineages. You have the Tarsiforms, so again, the living tarsiers that inhabit insular Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also an extinct group called the Omomyidae, which is particularly interesting. Uh, and then, of course, the second lineage is the Anthropoidea, that is the monkeys, who we'll meet momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So here we have the tarsiers. Now, these have become a bit of a curiosity in the world of living primates.
Mm-hmm.
They're the only fully carnivorous members of the clade, with a diet ranging from small flying insects to larger invertebrates. So they'll tackle snakes and birds and bats, which would be an interesting sight.
Mm-hmm.
They also have the largest eyes in proportion to their body of any primate,
Right.
really any mammal for that matter. In some species, the eyeball, just one eyeball, is larger than the brain,
Yes.
that's something to think about. Now, such big eyes make sense, of course, because tarsiers are nocturnal, and that means Haplorhines as a whole, have lost the tapetum lucidum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a feature in their eyes that's sort of it reflects light, excess light from the back of the eye, and that's where you get the eye shine on like a cat or a raccoon if
Right.
you point your flashlight at them. So they can't do this. They don't have that ability. So in order to make up for that light catching ability, they've just increased the size of their eyes
Yep.
and done it that way. In fact, their eyes are so big that they kind of do what owls do. They kind of have to swivel their heads in order to get a good view at anything.
Right. Yeah.
So Tarsiers is all eyes. It is all in the eyes. Now, they do stand alone among the Haplorhines. This is the only clade that it's gotten its name from its feature, its distinctive derived trait. They have greatly elongated the tarsus bone.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, that's the same area as the heel on our feet.
Mm-hmm.
And this allowed them to be master climbers and leapers in the trees. Again, like the lemurs of many kinds, they're very rapid and agile climbers, and they can jump from tree to tree very quickly. That certainly helped them get around. Like the Strepsirrhines, these primates once had a much larger distribution,
Yep.
extended to present-day Thailand and China, and they've even gone as far as Africa. And that just kind of is a testament to how far they've been able to get around.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, they're all found in insular Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so forth. We could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So then we have the second lineage of haplorhines. This is Anthropoidea. Sometimes you'll see it written as simiforms.
Hmm.
And this is where terminology can get very, very testy. Now, up until now, I've been able to refer to different primate groups as lemurs
Hmm.
or lorises,
Hmm.
tarsiers, and there's not a lot of fuss there. But what about a word like monkey?
Hmm.
You know, convention tells us that monkeys are anthropoids with tails, and then the anthropoids without tails are apes. Now, the advance and spread of phylogenetic thinking that we've been trying to push for this series has caused some researchers to analyze how they come to grips with common non technical terms like monkey.
Right.
Uh, there are two lineages of anthropoids that are commonly called monkeys today. You have the American Platyrrhini and the Afro-Eurasian Cercopithecidae. So that is the New World monkeys and the Old World monkeys, respectively. And apes, as it turns out, are more closely related to the Cercopithecids, and together they are united in a group called Catarrhini.
Hmm.
And so here we have a case where some monkeys are more closely related to apes than they are to other monkeys. So, oh, okay. Well, then that means that monkey is a paraphyletic group, right?
Hmm.
We should use the word monkey. Well, if you remember our discussion about phylogenetic terms from part one, you'll know that common names are not necessarily destiny. They can be used to serve whatever purposes are needed. You know, we've discovered that birds are nested within the clade Dinosauria.
Hmm.
But researchers, and Albert, I'm sure you can testify to this. People didn't throw up their hands and say, "Well, that means some dinosaurs are more closely related to birds than to other dinosaurs, so we shouldn't use the word dinosaur anymore." No, that's not what happened. They expanded the word dinosaur to include birds, and that's not to forget that the earliest birds had many anatomical features that were originally associated with so-called traditional dinosaurs.
Hmm.
They had the long bony tail, toothed jaws, and claws on the digits, for example. Now, it's when we include fossil primates in our surveys, that we find that the ancestors of the apes would have had many of the features that we tend to associate with monkeys.
Hmm.
They would have had tails, for instance, and that has led a greater number of researchers of various disciplines to argue that we should be comfortable using monkey as a common synonym for anthropoidea, which means that apes and thus humans would be considered monkeys.
Hmm.
Albeit very anatomically derived monkeys. Of course, you got your detractors too. There are people that will swear up and down that no, 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 monkey is a common term that has no use in science.
Right.
Uh, Albert, you have any takes on this?
I don't know. I don't have a particular dog in this fight, but I'm okay going either way on this.
Right, right. I'm sort of the same way too. I kind of like the uniqueness of using monkey in this way.
Hmm.
Um, but I can understand if other folks might not
Right.
jive with that. Well, in any case, it's by this time, 40 million years ago, that we get crowned monkeys. So we talk about stem versus crown.
Hmm.
Um, Earlier stem monkeys had established themselves in Asia. You have forms like Eosimius, which have retained the small bodies of the earlier diverging tarsiers, for
Hmm.
example. So again, that ancestral state. But then gradually, it seems, this group has expanded westward and eventually settled in Arabia and then Africa. And that's where further splits in anthropoid phylogeny occurred. It's important to note that while all this was happening, the Strepsirrhines were now losing ground and dying out across Eurasia and North America. And so it only seems plausible that there was competition between early anthropoids and these Strepsirrhine lineages that would have eventually left the Galagos and the Lorises all to themselves, and then Madagascar as the hub of Strepsirrhine life.
Hmm.
Now, there was another now extinct group of stem anthropoids. This is Parapithecidae, and this includes forms like Apidium, which, if you grew up with Walking with Beasts, you might remember Apidium.
Yes.
That was the I think it was the second episode
I
with
think
the
so.
Basilosaurus.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. So parapithecids have made their mark on popular culture. So woohoo, that's pretty cool. Um, by now, these animals were looking quintessentially monkey-like. They have teeth and skulls and limbs that greatly resemble the living species more than they do the earlier Haplorhines. And this is probably also reflected in their diets too. The anthropoids regained their diurnal behavior, so again, now they're back to being day-living animals, and they began to include fruits and seeds and leaves into their diet again. Now, Anthropoida is split into two major lineages. Again, we're continuing to go up the phylogeny. And so one of which we're going to shift focus on for the next couple slides. This is Platyrrhini. This is the New World or American monkeys. These are the only living non-human primates in Central and South America. And so then the question begs how they got there. And the most widely accepted hypothesis has parallels with the origins of the lemurs on Madagascar that we talked about earlier. That the ancestral Platyrrhines just rafted on these giant masses of foliage that crossed the Atlantic, and this would have been about 36 million years ago.
Yep.
And the phylogenetic affinities give a very strong case for the origins of Platyrrhines coming from West Africa. The earliest known Platyrrhine is Perupithecus, and it is very closely related to species on the mainland. Now, thankfully for these primates, and this is a sharp contrast from Madagascar, South America was closer to Africa 36 million years ago.
Yep.
It was some 1,448 kilometers at the nearest distance, so that's more than twice the present distance it is today. So it would have been a pretty easy journey. And, in fact, it would have been so easy that one other primate lineage, it turns out, made the same voyage as well.
Wow.
This is a very surprising study that I completely missed from earlier in April of this year, for those listening in the future. They found evidence of a parapithecid. This is Eucalypithecus, and it made it to present-day Peru, of all places, at roughly the same time that the early Platyrrhines were showing up, which is very interesting to think about. So it's no longer the case that, when considering the fossil record, that Platyrrhines had South America all to themselves. At least one of the parapithecids had made it. It'll be curious to see if they find more members of that group, or if this was just a one-off case.
Right.
There is, however, an equally curious hypothesis that states that rather than a rafting event, the ancestors of the Platyrrhines were island hopping to South America. So, incidentally, around 36 million years ago, there was a notable drop in sea level, which would have made the Atlantic Ocean a lot shallower than it is present. And as a rule, that means you got lots of additional land that gets exposed, which would have made the distances even closer than that. Based upon what we know about the geologic history of the Atlantic Ocean, it seems the feature-rich ocean floor has gradually gotten deeper over time, which means that 36 million years ago, the Atlantic would have been even shallower. So it's two continents closer together, shallow ocean. That means it's perfect for transcontinental distribution, or vicariance, if you will. Now, given the ebb and flow of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a very volcanically rich area, it's very possible that there were many small islands present. And, taking all of this, these researchers propose that Platyrrhines must have gradually moved from island to island over the course of a few million years, and eventually made landfall in South America. Now, taking these two hypotheses together, it is a bit of a conundrum. Albert, you're welcome to chime in on this. For the most part, it seems that the South American fauna originated mostly from a one-way trip from Africa.
Right.
I can't think of any cases where an African fauna arrived from South America. So
yeah, I think you're right.
It seems like this was a one-way thing that was happening, and must have happened probably multiple times. I mean, I know we were talking about the caviomorphs.
Yeah,
had made it.
A group of rodents,
South
including guinea pigs and capybaras.
Yeah, and then of course they really did well, just like the platypus. And of course, you have the animals that can swim and fly, and that. But we're talking about the land living ones.
Right, right.
Albert, do you have any takes on this? Do you think that the island hopping or the raft of vegetation seems more plausible for these animals?
Yeah, I would agree that the kind of one-way pattern we seem to be seeing would seem to favor rafting more because it's not clear what the barrier would be if there was a path, obvious path that could go both ways. But I guess the other thing is that there these two hypotheses are kind of a matter of degrees, I guess, because either way, you'd have to cross some water barrier, even if you are island hopping, and that could have been achieved with rafting in between. So,
Right.
so yeah, I think overall, from at least from what I've read, I think it's the rafting all the way seems more likely, but you know, it it's not completely at odds with the island hopping hypothesis, sort of a variant.
Yeah. Cause I was just thinking, like, even with island hopping, it's like the Platyrhines aren't really known for being good swimmers.
No, they're not. Yeah,
I don't think they swim at all. So
right,
it's like
right. Yeah, I
I think
think
it's creating more problems than one.
right. Yes, because yeah, I think even today, like rivers can be effective barriers for platyrhines and have contributed possibly to their speciation.
Right, right. So yeah, I think it's safe to say, like, hearing from the two of us, the rafting hypothesis seems the most likely.
Mm.
Of course, the island hopping is harder to test
Right.
because I mean you're talking about hypothetical islands that would now be hundreds of miles,
Yeah.
you know, covered by a deep ocean and probably like completely destroyed by seismic activity.
Mm.
So it's like, how do you even test that?
Right.
It's tough. It's very tough. Um, but yeah, so I guess we'll see if any further developments have arisen.
Mm.
But either way, the journey seems to have been pretty easy because once Platyrhines made it on the mainland, they just exploded in diversity, and it did very well for themselves. Now, two things to note before we move through the different lineages.
Mm.
What makes Platyrhines especially unique is the prehensile tail,
Yeah.
which they can use to support themselves in the trees. It acts like a second limb, if you will, or an extra limb, I should say.
Yeah.
Now, popular culture might tell you that this is a thing that all monkeys have.
Mm.
So you watch films that take place in Africa or India, and they'll show monkeys swinging by their tails. That's not accurate at all.
Mm.
That is not the case. If you see a monkey with a prehensile tail, it is a platyrrhine, plain and simple. Now, incidentally, sort of a uniqueness for primates, platyrrhines have actually reduced the divergent hallux.
Hmm.
So their thumb has become like a parallel finger with all the rest. Now, you might think that this would impede their climbing abilities, but it hasn't. These are very arboreal primates and have done very well for themselves. So it seems that the divergent hallux may have been an inhibiting factor, or maybe just something that was lost with other adaptations. It's a very good question. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Move forward with our platyrrhine lineages, of which there are three. And the first to have split off were the Pithecidae. So these are the Titis, Sakis, and Wakaris. Now, as a rule, pithecids have solved the problem of interspecies competition by shifting their diet towards fruits, nuts, and seeds that are unripe. Their canine incisors have strengthened in such a way as to make the cracking of extremely hard shells of unripe nuts very easy.
Huh.
Not to mention, they have these huge jaw muscles that help with processing such fruits. Now, incidentally, the TT monkeys have lacked these adaptations. They've kept the generalized anatomy of their ancestors. Now, incidentally, TT monkeys have remained an enigma in primate classification for the longest time because of this. They're so generalized that taxonomists didn't really have an idea about where they belonged. They kind of put them in their own family, if you will,
Yeah.
and put them at they're at least Platyrhines, but to what kind, it's anybody's guess. So of course, genetic work saved the day, and now they've found a home in the Pithecidae. And, very fascinating monkeys. The Wakari, which you can see at the the TT monkey is at the left-hand image.
Yep.
The Wakari is below, and then the Saki is at the top. One thing you'll almost certainly notice is the Wakari's bright red face. This is almost certainly a sexual feature. The females like to choose the males based upon who has the reddest face. This has become a source of sexual competition, if you will. And the Saki monkeys actively groom their bushy beards and sideburns and seem to take an active role in maintaining that. Even some of the females have this feature. So it seems that this has a sexual feature as well, although the literature on this is surprisingly quiet. I haven't been able to find a lot of data regarding the sexual selection in Saki monkeys. Hopefully I can remedy that in the near future. Now, if we go to the next slide, we have the largest of the Platyrhines. This is the Atelidae. Here's where we find the howler monkeys. And they're able to produce their characteristic calls because of an adaptation in their hyoid bone that's in the throat. It's a lot larger than other monkeys, and this has allowed a howler to send its messages to extreme distances of up to 5 kilometers.
Wow.
And it's a very haunting, like dinosaur-esque call that it almost certainly goes unignored. And given that howlers spend most of the day resting, it helps to conserve energy that would otherwise be lost in confrontations with other groups. To rely on these calls as more of a communication. Basically, it's their way of saying, "Hey, I'm here. Are you guys over there? Yes, I'm over there. Okay, good. Let's not fight each other. Okay." And so they can go back to resting. Not have to worry about which is the funny way to live your life. Also in the group, you have the spider monkeys, which have taken the Platyrrhine prehensile tail and really modified it towards a greater use. I mean, there's a naked patch at the tip of the tail, and it's full of these sensory touch receptors. And so, it really works like a fifth hand. It can detect and even like collect food and water. It can scoop up water and bring it to their mouths. It's really efficient. And then there's the woolly monkeys, which is the individual at the right here. If the name hasn't given it away, well, they have very dense coats. They're really woolly. That's because they live in cloud forests. So you might be familiar with mountain gorillas of Virunga. It's the same sort of environment. It's very high moisture and it's very cool in temperature. And so this would have helped a woolly coat would have helped these monkeys be more comfortable in their environment. Now, incidentally, in prehistory, the Atelidae has spawned some really impressive members of their own. You can go deep into the geologic past and find giant Platyrhines, much like you could find giant lemurs in Madagascar. Just to throw one example out there, there's a Caipora from Brazil. It's twice as big as the average spider monkey, weighing over 20 kilograms.
Wow.
So this was an impressive animal to see in person. I mean, like a living spider monkey is pretty impressive too. I mean, going to some zoo, if you weren't looking, like it would almost seem like you're watching gibbons or chimps. They're hefty. So we go to the next slide, please. Here we come to the last clade. This is Cebidae. And it's a particularly tricky clade. So some taxonomists see the differences between its 3 members. So you have the capuchins and the squirrel monkeys. So the capuchin is on the right, squirrel monkeys on the very top. Then you have the owl monkeys, which are in the center.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the marmosets and the tamarins on the left here. And they see these three groups as having great enough differences to put them into three different clades,
Mm-hmm.
or families, if you will.
Right.
Um, this is kind of a trivial thing. I mean, they all are clearly related to each other,
Mm-hmm.
so it makes just as much sense to have them as one clade Cebidae than as three different clades.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what I've chosen here. Now, the capuchins and the squirrel monkeys are really popular primates in zoos. They're
Yes.
certainly the ones that I really like seeing whenever I get the chance. And it's clear that the staff have seen why. I mean, they're very social, and they breed during times of plenty. So rather than breeding on a seasonal basis, if there's a lot of food, then they'll be ready to breed.
Mm-hmm.
Which means babies, and everybody loves a good baby animal at this
Right.
zoo. And for the capuchins, at least, they use tools in a way that rivals the apes.
Mm.
They have been documented doing some really incredible stuff. If you've watched a Life, the BBC
Mm-hmm.
series, you would have seen how they use rocks to crack open seeds and nuts. Like they'll take a rock and they'll hover it just right over a nut on top of another rock,
Mm-hmm.
and with just the right number of force, crack it open. And apparently, there's even cases where a capuchin will take a stick or a branch like a weapon, and they'll use it to beat away a venomous snake or
Ah,
something that wants to catch it.
right.
So they're really crafty. Um, and in fact, like this tool making ability probably corresponds to the development of their hands. You might be able to see it in the image here of the two capuchins. They've actually re-evolved the divergent hallux
Right.
in a way by taking that original digit and turning it into what is technically called a pseudo-opposable thumb. It's not like the full divergent hallux like you see in other anthropoids, but this has given them such a dexterity that probably helped contribute to their tool making abilities. Now, the owl monkeys, the ones in the center here, these are the only nocturnal anthropoids. So they're taking a page from the tarsiers and the lorises, by evolving these large eyes that can help them see in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
This adapted lifestyle likely has a dual function. I mean, if you can avoid resource competition from other monkeys, and you can avoid certain predators by eating at night. So
Right.
it's a win-win situation. Now, the marmosets and the tamarins are very derived primates. And, besides their diminutive size, these are really the only group of monkeys that have actually modified their flat nails back into pointed claws.
Yeah.
And these serve a very important function. These are essentially hooks because they love cleaning up these very precarious vertical surfaces and digging into the bark of trees so they can eat the gum
Mm-hmm.
and the sap.
Right.
And they'll go after insects as well, grubs. And then there's the two species of pygmy marmosets
Uh,
that are pollinators for certain kinds of fruit. So taking kind of like how some lemurs are pollinators, some monkeys are pollinators too. And unsurprisingly, the pygmy marmosets are the world's smallest monkeys.
right.
So they're no small feat. We can go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So we're just about wrapping up here.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you all sticking with us. The other great lineage of anthropoids is Catarrhini. These are the old world monkeys. Now, as their name suggests, the living members of the group inhabit Africa and Eurasia. That's where they're native to. And really, their evolution was basically confined to that region
Mm-hmm.
over a period of 29 million years or more. There is very little differentiation between the ancestors of the Platyrrhines and the living Catarrhines, so you really have to look closer to find these derived features
Mm.
in sum total. Old world monkeys have the downward facing nostrils as opposed to the sideways facing nostrils of Platyrrhines. And the dental formula, again, is very distinct. Catarrhines have two incisors, one canine, two premolars, and three molars. So that's 32 teeth in all.
Mm-hmm.
The fossil record for Catarrhines has gotten increasingly better over the years. For example, we have a now extinct clade of monkeys. This is the Proplyopithecidae, and this includes the famous Egyptopithecus from present-day Egypt, which you may have seen in older books on human evolution. It was originally thought to be a kind of ape, but it has more of a stem position on the family tree nowadays. And it's in species like these, so this is 32 million years ago, that we begin to see the gradual changes in traits that are typical of the group. While there are, the similarities to the earlier ancestral anthropoids as well, which means that as far as classification is concerned, it can get a little bit tricky at times to find out who's related to who. It isn't until we reach forms like Sidonius, which is here on the right, where we get the full suite of the crowned catarrhine features in place. In fact, the phylogenetic studies that were done when this primate was first discovered found that it was very close to the split between the two living lineages. So the Cercopithecidae, which is the old world monkeys traditional, and then the Hominoidea, which are the apes, which again we'll save for the next part. Now, all the evidence suggests that catarrhines evolved somewhere in the Afro-Arabian region by 29 million years ago, which meant that the later forms could easily move into the African and Eurasian interior with relative ease, given the great expanse of tropical forests at the time as well. This is sort of paralleling the earliest primates. You have all these forests that are just kind of blending into each other, so you can easily go from one to the other, and before long you're crossing continents. The rise of the Cercopithecidae and all of its living lineages is actually tied very closely with the evolution of the apes and their story. So we'll have to save all of those details for the next episode because that becomes very important later. So for now, I'd like to conclude this primate survey by showcasing the two clades of Cercopithecids, which we'll see on the next slide.
Yep.
So first up is Colobinae. These are the leaf-eating monkeys. Now, while the members of this group will feed on insects and other small animals, it's through their herbivorous diet that these monkeys have distinguished themselves. In order to process leaves in the first place, which they're pretty tough to eat in general, colobines have evolved a multi-chambered fermenting stomach, akin to something like a cow, where you have these colonies of bacteria that grow and thrive, breaking down cellulose, removing toxic chemicals, and extracting more protein from the food. Now, unlike cows, however, these primates don't chew the cud, so they don't pass food back into their mouths for further chewing, which would probably distract them from other important things. They're able to get their energy that they need. This is a pretty diverse group. Wouldn't make sense to go through every single one, so I'll just give a couple of examples. There's the colobus monkeys themselves. This very handsome individual on the right here is the black and white colobus. It's a particular favorite of mine. I just think they're unique. That fluffy tail.
Yeah.
And this like cloak, if you will.
Right.
Kind of. So you don't really see that in a lot of monkeys.
No.
These are found in Central Africa. And there are also related species that come in many different colors. So like there's a red colobus, for example. And then you have the langurs, which inhabit India and Southeast Asia. Very populous. They have very diverse social lifestyles. They can be very friendly when they need to be, and also very rough when they need to be. So they have these very, very fluid hierarchical structures. For Hindus, the gray langurs in particular are held in very high regard and are seen as sacred animals. They're the spitting image of Hanuman, which is a god of strength and knowledge, hence an older name for the group Hanuman langurs. Now, next we have the snub-nosed monkeys. So that's the individual on the center bottom there. The nose is nothing more than a point at which the nostrils are very exposed. And I can only imagine that must make life very interesting. There's a curious story about the Myanmar snub-nosed monkey, which supposedly sneezes when it rains. So it has to kind of hold its head down to keep it from sneezing too much. I believe that's how they discovered that particular species. Hunters were like, "Oh, just hear the sounds of sneezing, and you'll find them."
Wow!
And we have a new species thanks to that. Supposedly.
Right.
And then there's our funny friend, the proboscis monkey above,
Yeah.
who's taken the opposite extreme. The male often has more nose than he knows what to do with. There's a very funny anecdote that I read, and I'd love to see this in person. There's a male proboscis monkey. He looked up at something so quickly that his nose actually smacked between his eyes.
Wow.
Just imagining this monkey. Oh, that cracks me up. I believe the nose is. It's sort of like with the Saki monkeys. It's a sexual selective feature.
Right.
I mean, both sexes, the males, it's very pronounced, and I imagine that's what the females are looking for. The better the nose, the better the male. So if we can go to the next slide,
Yep.
the last primate lineage we'll explore is Cercopithecinae. So these are the cheek-pouched monkeys. Now, much like a rodent, like say a hamster, if you've owned one, you've seen this.
Yep.
These monkeys have very fleshy cheek pouches, which they use to store excess food while they're foraging. Sometimes there's dangers in the area, and it helps to be able to kind of put food away temporarily while you can search for a safer place to eat and then resume feeding. Now, like their relatives, the Cercopithecines are also incredibly diverse. And they probably contain some of the more familiar monkeys that are seen in Africa and Eurasia, certainly in popular culture at least. The macaques, which you can see at the center right. They're said to have the greatest range than any other old world monkey. They're found from Gibraltar all the way to Sulawesi. This group includes, again, as I've photographed here, the well-documented Japanese macaque, and which I really need to clarify this because this only came to my attention very recently, so I try to internalize it. Not every Japanese macaque uses hot springs.
Oh, right.
There's one population that lives in one national park in Japan that relies on these springs to keep warm during the winter months. Other Japanese macaques, I mean, they pretty much live like any other macaque. They inhabit forests and whatnot, or on the coasts. But the jacuzzi monkeys, that's just one group. It's not reflective of the whole population, if you will. Also notable in the group is the baboons, which you can see on the very top here. They represent a very interesting case study for a primate that switched from a life in tropical forests to a life on the open grasslands without becoming bipedal. We'll talk more about this in the next part for the implications. Now, baboons are very powerful animals. When they're protecting themselves and their families, they can really throw their weight around and give a really nasty bite with these long, inch-like canines. I remember the story of Fred the baboon, who lived in Cape Town, South Africa. I believe Inside Nature's Giants profiled him. It was a wonderful documentary series about animal dissections, but it was all like megafauna, which is kind of like you hear about that and you're just kind of like, what? That sounds really cool. And it is. I can't recommend it enough. I really should go back and watch it again. But they did Fred's autopsy. And Fred was a menace to the human community. He would break into cars and steal food and things and would get into fights with people. So, eventually, he was taken down, and it was revealed through the autopsy that he had been shot more than 50 times before he was eventually killed. And he sustained something like 80 bullet pellets inside his body that they found.
Wow.
So you don't want to mess with a baboon if you can help it. Get on their good side. They'll protect you. Now, although it looks like a baboon, the mandrill, which is at the left here, is not a baboon. I think you can thank the Lion King for that error.
Oh, right.
When they were Rafiki, they kind of put a mandrill's face on a baboon's body.
Yeah.
But the mandrills are very different. Like the mandrill has kind of a stump tail, for example, whereas the baboon a long tapering tail. And they come from different lineages too. like that characteristic red and blue face that you see there, that is a social status symbol.
Mm-hmm.
The female chooses the male based on its face, and actually, if a male mandrill can actually climb to like the dominant position in the group, the colors of the face will actually brighten
Mm.
quite a bit. That'll signal that, hey, I'm the alpha here.
Right.
And the rest of the Circopithecines, I mean, they're fairly average as far as body type go. I
Mm.
mean, they look your general monkey shape. I mean, you got the mangabees and the swamp monkeys,
Mm.
and these are found in wetland environments. And then you have the guenons,
Mm.
which you can have very colorful faces.
Yep.
I mean, those are actually pretty interesting as far as behavior goes. It's kind of like with the lemurs. You can have multiple species that live in the same group, and they're actually able to share different resources even on the same tree.
Mm.
They partition themselves in such a way as they can really cohabitate well.
Right.
And what makes these partnerships very beneficial is that you'll have certain species will kind of stay on the lookout for predators, and if they spot one, they will belt out a warning call that all the other species can recognize.
Mm. Right.
And they're actually what predator is spotted,
Mm.
whether that's a leopard or a snake or an eagle or something. It's all different. And incidentally, these partnerships are so strong that these monkeys will actually hybridize readily with each
Huh.
other, which I imagine causes a lot of taxonomic headaches in the early
Right.
days. So, in conclusion, while primates have undergone a very enormous radiation of forms and lifestyles and ranges, as you've seen from this series, there are still these deep threads that connect all of us together. Key anatomies and behaviors and cultures, like the ones that I discussed at the beginning, that are unique to all primates, whether that's a lemur or an ape. And so that should give you some idea about what the earliest ancestors of humanity might have lived like. They were social, nurturing, and creative primates.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, if we go to the next slide,
Yep.
the story will continue. Speaking of apes, we'll look at their evolution as well as the distinction of the hominins, or the human lineage, in the next episode.
Sounds good.
Now, while the genetic data for the family tree of the living apes is well established, when you add fossils to the mix, things get very complicated.
Mm.
And somewhere very deep in all of this, going back to the Miocene epoch, uh, lies the first hominins, the earliest ancestors of the human lineage. And it just becomes a matter of who, where, and how they evolved. And in that, we'll also look at the origins of bipedality.
Right.
How is it we've come to walk on two legs so well? Which you'll come to learn more than anything that distinguishes human beings was one of the earliest signs of our origin.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, I believe, go to the next slide. That is it.
Right.
Of course, as we like to acknowledge, the wonderful theme music by our friend Henry Thomas.
Yep. Mm.
And the color scheme for Albert's avatar was provided by Alicia. And you can follow us on our Twitter for updates whenever we post new episodes. Of course, our website is on YouTube through Time and Clay. It's just search us in, and you'll have all of our episodes listed there for you. If you have any questions about the show, whether that be about primate diversity or anything that tickles your interest, feel free to shoot us an email. We're at timeandclades@gmail.com. And in our episode descriptions on YouTube, we provide links to references. If you want to learn a little bit more about the world of primates, there's a wonderful list of books and research papers that you can check out.
Sounds good.
And it for me. Albert, do you have any announcements you'd like to make?
Let's see. So, I believe our next episode will be going back to my bird series, Dinosaurs, the second chapter. So that will be about the group Galloanceri, which unites the chickens and ducks. And so we're going to look at, some of our interesting and very familiar farmyard birds and their close relatives, both living and extinct. So that'll be the next one. Yeah, take care and stay safe, everybody.
Yep, thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.
Indeed.